Hey guys, welcome to another flight tutorial and aircraft review on this beautiful Bumblebee. It's the Bell 47 by Flyinside. This simulation was released as the first payware helicopter for MSFS, so when the guys decided to port it over to X-Plane 11, I couldn't help myself but to purchase it. This is not an official Microsoft flight simulator product. As of yet, they have not developed a specific helicopter flight model for that simulation platform. So the guys from Flyinsides went ahead and created their own little plugin. And to be honest, I didn't expect much, thinking back on FSX and its poor flight modeling for helicopters. I can already tell you that I was in for a surprise. Now let's look at the aircraft from the outside. Personally, I'm not caring too much about the visuals. I care more about the flight modeling. However, you can see that the aircraft pretty much looks spot on. The texturing is great. And in the recent update, they added a pilot figure in the cockpit. Also something that I truly don't care about. Now, I tried to fly this thing before. Christmas 2 years ago, I got MSFS as a present. I downloaded it, a painfully long process. And I installed it on one of my computers that had the 120 plus gigs of free hard disk space available, only to realize that my internet connection apparently isn't good enough. I couldn't get anywhere near decent frame rates, so I couldn't fly it. I forgot all about it, put away MSFS, but now that they've released it for X-Plane 11, it was time to try again. Now, what got me interested in the aircraft in the first place is the fact that you need to manually throttle the aircraft to keep decent rotor RPMs. A thing that you usually do not have to worry too much about if you're flying a helicopter with a governor. The collective of a helicopter collectively changes the angle of attack of the main rotor blades. When the angle of attack increases, so does the drag that the rotor blades experience while moving through the air. This in turn will naturally slow down the rotors unless you give in a little throttle to keep the rotor RPMs at a sufficient level to keep the aircraft airborne. As you lower collective, of course, the induced drag decreases, so the rotors naturally would speed up, which you also have to avoid by then reducing the throttle. If you have a governor, of course, all that throttling work is being done for you. However, Dreamfall's S300 was the only aircraft out there that did let you explore this fourth helicopter control. Until now. Enter the Bell 47 by Flyinside. Now, back to visuals. This is a piston-powered aircraft. I think there were 47 models out there with a turbine. However, this is a piston-powered aircraft, and you can see the engine beautifully modeled here. Also notice the rather large fuel tanks above the engine on the starboard and port side. You also see the typical stabilizers on the main rotor mast, same thing you would find in a Bell UH-1. If I push in the pedals, you can see the angle of attack of the tail rotor blades changing. Same thing goes for the main rotor. If I pull up collective, you see the pitch change. The only thing that I find a little weird is the looks of the main rotor. You can see that it is very stiff, very linear in shape. The original doesn't droop too much. It is also very stiff. However, it is a little bit curved. So that's a little eye candy thing that they could work on, in my opinion. What you also will see when the engine is running is that we have actually all the moving parts of the engine animated, as well as the tail rotor transmission. As I already mentioned, they have added a pilot on public demand who seems to have difficulties getting a grip on the cyclic. However, you see all the controls moving as they should from outside the helicopter as well. So enough talk, let's get inside Flyinside's Bell 47G. A very good helicopter if you want to learn the ground principles of helicopter flight, which also includes engine management, of course. One thing that I don't appreciate too much is that the viewpoint always resets to the position that you just saw when you re-enter the aircraft from an outside view. Quick side note as I check my controls here. After experiencing some random crashes, I got it from the guys on Flyinsides that you are supposed to assign the throttle 1 axis to your twist grip controller, not the general throttle axis. If you don't have a twist grip throttle in the first place, you can still enjoy this aircraft. They've modeled in an engine governor that you can activate via a switch on the collective. There had been a few issues on initial release. One of them was that when I loaded up the aircraft in a cold and dark state, all the lights would actually be activated even with the battery off. Another thing was that the ignition key would sort of erratically switch positions while in flight. Both of these issues have been corrected with the latest update. Before switching on the battery, I like to switch off some of the lights that I don't need. Strobe lights and nav lights can go to off. I'm going to keep the beacon, that's the anti-collision light that I want to show for engine start. Now, it would be great if the aircraft actually saved the configuration that you left it in. However, if you have already activated the battery and the instruments are dead, there is a power switch located on the bottom left corner of the main panel. Let's switch that on. Now, looking at the gauges. The two most important gauges are these two, the upper one being the RPM gauge showing you the engine and rotor RPMs, and the lower one being the manifold pressure gauge. Now the Bell 47 is limited on maximum manifold pressure that you can pull. It's marked by a little red line there. You just make sure that you do not exceed that or the aircraft will crash. The RPM gauge has two needles, a longer one for engine RPM and a smaller one for rotor RPM. After starting the engine, those two needles will marry or be superimposed, and it's important that we keep it inside the green area on the RPM gauge. Of course, for that we use our throttle. If you use the governor, you do not have to worry about it. Right next to it is the indicated airspeed gauge in miles per hour, not knots, mind you. There's also a red line that you shouldn't cross. It's around 100 miles per hour, and that would be VNE, velocity never exceed. Even though the latter changes with altitude and load settings, just make sure that you do not get past the red line and you should be good. Down here is our vertical speed indicator, and that was a weird sound. Probably was the altimeter. Speaking of which, I've encountered what I think is a little bug here. When the engines are off, the manifold pressure gauge should actually show us the outside air pressure. The closer you are to main sea level, the more reliable this is. And it shows us a little less than 30 inches. As you might have seen, we are at sea level. So it matches with the current altimeter setting. Let's have a look. Yeah, let's set it to 2999 or something, and it should match field elevation. However, the weird thing is that these settings do not match up with the current air pressure in X-plane. So if I dial in the current altimeter for Seychelles, which is 2979, we can see that the altimeter reads minus 140 feet. This can, of course, cause some problems if you're on the VATSIM server and ATC gives you an altimeter setting, and the altimeter actually shows you wrong readings. Let's set it back to field elevation. Unless I have been doing something wrong here, I think this is something that needs to be repaired. I already told the guys they are very helpful if you contact them for support, and they are very eager to fix these kind of things. Now a few gauges left. Down here is the fuel gauge. On the lower right, the cylinder head temperature. This should be oil pressure, I believe, I'm not sure. And this gauge shows you one of two temperatures. It's either the oil temperature or the transmission oil temperature, and what the scale shows you depends on which position that switch is in. So if it's in the down position, it'll show you transmission oil pressure, and if it's switched up, it'll show you oil temperature, which would be the engine oil temperature, of course. So let's fire up. Before starting the battery, I want to switch off all the electrical devices that I don't need, such as the transponder and the radio, which are by default set to on. I don't want to drain the battery, which I have just switched on. If you don't read anything on the instruments, make sure that the instrument switch is on. Next step is pushing in the fuel mixture lever and setting the ignition key into the bolt position. Now there's a fuel prime switch. I don't think it is simulated, but I'm gonna switch it to on anyways. Quick check before engine start. Fuel mixture in, fuel prime on, battery on, anti-collision light on, Magneto set to both, throttle closed. Make sure the cyclic is in the center position, and then we can just start the engine by pressing the starter. So the engine is started. You see the rise in engine RPM. We're going to keep it at about 1,500 ground idle, and you can see the rotors already starting to spool up. Now this may take a while. The centrifugal clutch is slipping along at the beginning to allow the engine to start up without any load of the rotors. And the rotor RPM will now slowly rise and meet up with the engine RPM. That's what we are waiting for. Down here, I can show you again, if you flick the switch, the gauge above it will show you the transmission oil or engine oil temperature. I can see that we have full fuel. I'm going to quickly check in Explain's menu so that we are not overloaded. Just making sure that we're not too heavy. No, it looks good. I may reduce the fuel. We don't need that much for our little hop over to Ascension Island. Now the Axis Viewer plugin that you can see on the left bottom corner of the screen, it's a great tool. You can get it on the Explain forum. It does not show us anything about the position that the throttle is in, so I have added in this little video so you're able to see what I do with the throttle. We're at pad 13, I think it is, on Mahe International in the Seychelles, airport code Foxtrot Sierra India Alpha. I like to use this scenery because it's very beautiful to fly in, especially for helicopters hopping from island to island, and it also gives me quite decent frame rates, which are good when you do screen capturing. We're going to fly over to Ascension Island, which has a nice little helipad. And one thing that is bothering me about the sound is generally pretty good, but as you can hear, once I turn my head, the sound then goes exclusively over to the right channel, which I guess is supposed to be some sort of stereo panorama. I don't know how they designed this, for which audio system. However, when using normal stereo headphones or a stereo system, yeah, you have sound only in one channel, which I find rather annoying. We see the voltage lamp coming on, so it's time to activate the alternator, which gives us electrical power for our lights that we can now switch on, and of course the radio and the transponder. Now, sound is rather important in an aircraft like this. I'm going to tell you why in a few moments. We can see that the engine RPM and rotor RPM are now in sync, so the needles have married and we are ready to spool up the engine. I'm going to kill the fuel prime here, and I'm going to run up the engine by inducing a little bit of throttle, and I want to maintain 15 inches on the manifold gauge, manifold pressure gauge, and the RPMs will now slowly rise up to flight idle. Now here's a great thing about this simulation. Once the RPMs wander through this little yellow tape there, you can see the vibrations on the aircraft. Now this is an area where the aircraft will experience excessive vibration, so you should get through there rather quickly. It's lovely that they animated this. It shows the attention to detail. So back to the sound. When we try to keep the engine RPM in the green on the RPM gauge, we can of course check visually, and we should. However, we can also rely on our ears, because we will hear a difference in engine RPM by the change of the pitch of the engine sound. If the pitch gets higher, we're probably in an overspeed, and if the pitch gets lower, RPMs are probably too low. So that's actually the reason why I don't like the way they did the panning on the sound. Hopefully they are going to change that in future updates. So we're almost there, and we're about to pick this thing up into a hover. As the Schweizer 300, this aircraft has a correlator, which is a mechanical device that induces fuel once you raise the collective and reduces the fuel flow when you lower the collective. However, compared to Dreamfall's Schweizer 300, the amount of control inputs that you need to do are quite a bit more excessive on this aircraft. Important to understand is also that our tail rotor is also pulling power from the main engine. So if I push in left pedal, like so, you can hear a drop in engine RPM. Vice versa, if I let go of the left pedal or push in some right, you can get a slight rise in RPMs. It is so great that they simulated this. That means that if I push in a lot of left pedal, I need to be prepared to give in a little bit of throttle, and if I let go of the left pedal, I might have to reduce throttle. You could do the Magneto checks and a needle split check, basically testing the freewheeling unit of the clutch, important for auto rotations. I didn't do that today. I'm just trying to find out the correct setting of the throttle here. Good, we're about ready to lift off. So I'm going to pull collective in, and while I do that I will constantly roll on the throttle as well in order to keep engine RPMs in the green area. We also make sure, of course, that we don't exceed the maximum manifold pressure. For a good and level liftoff, the cyclic position should be dead center on this simulation. We also need quite a bit of left pedal for takeoff. Now I'm still learning to keep the correct relation between throttle and collective. Sometimes you get in a situation where the collective pitch is too high, your throttle is too low, and then when you catch up with the throttle, suddenly you spring up in the air. Now here we go, first takeoff. Now that was not a good liftoff. We had a little bit of aft movement, but now we're in the air. You also heard a dip in engine RPM, so I wasn't throttling up enough. Now the difficult thing is to keep a low hover. This thing wants to climb rather rapidly, and it's a constant. I'm constantly balancing out throttle and collective here to find a good spot for a low hover. Once you're in the hover, the aircraft is basically pretty stable. Cyclic control inputs should be small. Sometimes they need to be a little bit more aggressive, but usually, yeah, they should be small. And there is a slight lag in control inputs, so you need to anticipate a little bit what the aircraft is doing. However, still, the cyclic is rather responsive as it should be in a helicopter. Let's hover it a bit here. I'm gonna hover taxi along this little paved area. There I'm climbing, so I'm reducing collective a little bit and try to keep the RPMs in the green. Don't want to climb too high on the hover. Now let's get into forward flight. You might have to add in a little collective when you accelerate. Now I'm going to turn, I'm going to let go of the left pedal, and you will see the aircraft climb a little bit. As I told you before, if we let go of the left pedal, RPMs will increase. So I'm just lowering the throttle a little bit. That was too much, you can hear it. And slowly and controlled hover taxi over to runway 31. It's a challenge to fly this thing on manual throttle. That's basically what I love about this aircraft. I recently did a review on Dreamforce Schweizer S300 for Explain, exploring the helicopter routes of London, so go check that out if you're interested. You will need to do manual throttling on that aircraft as well, but not as much as on this one. Just trying to keep a low hover taxi altitude. It is kind of heavy on the frame rates as well, and sometimes you can see these lags in the flow of the simulation. I don't have that with other helicopters. It could also be the plugin that they use for the Flyinside Bell 47. I'm going to set it down at the holding point of the runway here. This aircraft is rather hard to set down gently. If I lower collective as well as the RPMs, the aircraft then just drops like a stone. And I don't want to do that. I want to keep it nice and controlled. Now you could cushion the landing, which is something that I don't recommend when you're doing a touchdown, because by pulling up collective you sort of get an extra rotor thrust that easily destabilizes your hover. But you might have to do it with this aircraft. Now, my technique right now is just leading with the throttle, reducing engine RPM more than reducing collective, which gives me a more controlled descent. I don't know if that's the way that you're supposed to do it, but it's giving me, yeah, kind of good results. I mean, this is still a little bit rough for my taste, but yeah, still learning. Alright, we are going to put it up again, hopefully a little bit better than last time. So raising collective and rolling on throttle at the same time, keeping the cyclic centered, and push in left pedal. This one was quite a bit better than the first one. I'm trying to slowly raise collective so I have time to react with the throttle. Maybe I'm going to try out to do it the other way around, so leading with the throttle. But yeah, it's basically training your muscle memory to get to know the aircraft. We're going to do a quick pedal turn here on the runway. A pedal turn to the left might not be possible depending on how heavy you are, on how much power you are pulling from the engine. If you're on max manifold pressure already, turning left will not be possible, or you will overload the engine. We're gonna do a right pedal turn. Notice how the aircraft will want to climb once we let go of the left pedal. I'm opposing this by reducing the throttle just a tiny increment to keep my altitude. It's pretty easy to over-control the aircraft getting into a PIO, a pilot-induced oscillation, especially when you're close to the ground and you try to sit it down. So gently on the cyclic. According to X-Plane, we have 10 knots of wind at 350 degrees. I don't feel any effect on the aircraft, actually. So helicopters have the tendency to weather wane into the wind. But this aircraft doesn't do it, so I'm going to quickly set it down again. You know, practice makes perfect. Trying to keep the aircraft in a stable hover and then slowly reducing the throttle, so leading with the throttle, as you can hear, and that makes the helicopter settle down quite alright. So the wind situation actually makes me believe that there might be a problem with the Flyinside plugin and X-Plane's weather settings, which would also explain the bug with the altimeter setting. I don't know. Maybe I suggest that or ask that in the forum. Now, since we're quite limited on power with this machine, this is not an aircraft to climb vertically out of an airport with. To get acceptable climb speeds, we need to get into effective translational lift. Now, this is an effect that happens when the airflow moves through the rotors, not vertically but more horizontally, and it gives the rotor disc an increased effectiveness, and thereby produces more lift. So we need to build up speed in order to climb out. I'm going to push the nose forward, increase collective, as well as throttle a little bit. I also keep the nose straight by use of the anti-torque pedals, and I push in a little bit of left cyclic to oppose the tendency of the aircraft to roll to the right. That's called Transverse Flow. You can check out my video on climb, cruise, and descent for an explanation. So the ETL, or effective translational lift, will reduce the load on the engine, so we can pull a little bit more collective then to increase our rate of climb. Gonna build up a little bit more speed here. Then we're going to increase collective and throttle a little bit. Now this is power management for you. Of course, you wouldn't have to worry about this in a Bell 407 unless you have loaded it up completely. In the Bell 47, however, you need to be mindful of the available power of your piston engine. And I think they did a very, very good job modeling this. As I said, I didn't expect much, but I was completely overwhelmed by the accuracy of the flight model, which makes me believe that this might very well become one of my favorite choppers in X-Plane. However, this is not an aircraft to get to places. You can see the climb out is painfully slow, and the cruise will not do much better. We will maybe make 70 to 90 miles per hour, depending on our load and the winds maybe. So it is a perfect aircraft for slow scenic flights, enjoying the scenery. However, if you want to go long distance, it is probably rather tedious to take this machine. It goes basically as fast as your car does. So we're going to climb to 1,500. I keep an eye out on my manifold pressure, and if I see that I have any room, so to speak, I'm increasing collective to get a little bit more speed out of the aircraft. Now, another nice thing that they did is, you can hear it actually, that's a good point for the sound. You hear the airflow against the fuselage, so the wind hitting the aircraft. This is actually modeled in the sound that you hear. This is something that I quite like. I also like the little wobble of the aircraft, so yawing from right to left every now and then. Some of the helicopters in X-Plane tend to be a little bit too stable in flight. You know, a real helicopter will sort of yaw a little bit from side to side, as this one does. Sometimes it can be a little erratic, which makes me think it might not be intentional, but the way that it is right now, I think it's very good. And one thing that they didn't model apparently, if I pull aft on the stick, so pitch the nose of the helicopter up, I would expect to see a rise in rotor RPM when the aircraft is sort of ballooning up. Now this is something that I can't see in this model. Now I'm going to shut up for a minute so you can enjoy the scenery. Now 1,500 feet, let's get into cruise and let's see what speed the aircraft will give us. Quickly pausing the flight here to take a closer look at my gauges. I want to make sure that they're in the green so I don't crash on this tutorial flight here. Probably due to the parallax error, it's sometimes a bit hard to see whether you know, your needles are in the green or they're actually a little bit above that. So we're only making about 80 miles per hour, which is rather slow, but I don't feel that there's too much more power that we can pull, so I'm going to keep it there. You can see Ascension Island dead ahead in the distance. However, I'm going to speed up the video a little bit so you do not have to watch me sort of creeping along the skies here. I'm going to get back to you when we start our approach. Welcome back. I'm going to start my approach pretty soon. As you can see on the manifold pressure, we have some room now, so we could pull a little bit more collective and then gain a little extra speed. When I tried out the governor mode, I experienced some weird crashes. So I was just raising collective, and the moment the aircraft took off, X-Plane was telling me that I crashed, even though the needles were in the green. I figured out that it had something to do with my throttle axis binding, so when I unassigned the twist grip throttle to none in the X-Plane controls menu, these crashes stopped, if that should help anybody out there. There's another little bug that has not been fixed yet on version 1.59, that's the one I'm flying right now, and it has to do with X-Plane's replay. So if you do a replay of this aircraft, it will not show you what actually happened. I don't know what the problem is there, but we sure hope that it's going to get fixed anytime soon. So I started my descent into Ascension Island here by lowering the collective as well as rolling off a little bit of throttle. So descent is not eventful at all. You might have to reduce left pedal or put in a little bit of right pedal to keep the aircraft in trim. Just look at the trim ball below the airspeed gauge. Now I realized that we haven't done a approach into a busy airport. I've done a video on departing a busy airport on VATSIM. However, I'm planning to do that in the future. Also, we are going to take a look at the BO-105, one of the helicopters that was flying all around the country in my childhood, which recently has been released by JRX. We're going to fly along the coast of this beautiful island. I would sure love to visit it in real life sometime. And the helipad will be just around that northern tip of the island. The default scenery of X-Plane 11 is not that good, as you might have noticed on some of my other videos. This is a payware scenery by Maps to X-Plane, which looks pretty good. A problem are always these coastlines in the default scenery of X-Plane. But notice how well they are made here with a lot of 3D objects. You got these huge boulders and rocks, and you got the occasional palm tree leaning into the sea. That's very lovely. Also, the water textures of X-Plane are a little bland, but they sort of try to have an overlay here, or underlay, or whatever it's called, so you can see some coral reefs below the water. Of course, X-Plane cannot rival with MSFS in any way, as you know, regarding the scenery. So I'm slowing down the aircraft a little bit. We're going to fly around that little peninsula here, and then we are going to approach the helipad. Slowing down the aircraft is not a problem. I can't shake off the feeling that the Bell 47 is actually an aircraft that does not want to fly unless you make it. Started to snow outside a few minutes ago, so I would rather be here on this Shells Island, actually. Now as we come in for landing, I'm going to try to keep the helicopter above the helipad and then try for a soft landing. But yeah, this is still something that I'm working on, setting the aircraft down gently. It's not a problem to land it, it's not a problem to take off, but doing so in style still needs some practice, I believe. As I said, you need to take your time to fly this bird anywhere. It is really slow. But I love how the aircraft handles. It's a very good simulation with a lot of attention for detail. I'm pretty impressed at Flyinside. I hope that the few issues that the product still has are getting fixed. And I highly recommend it to you guys to learn about the principles of helicopter flight, about the correlation of all full flight controls. Yeah, Flyinside has delivered. Definitely there are some few minor things that are hopefully being worked on. And yeah, you don't get this kind of thing from these modern helicopters with their powerful turbines. Their FADEC systems or their SAS and autopilot systems. I mean, they're also great simulations. They're fun to fly. I use them all the time. However, this is something new. It adds something new to the game, and to me it's very challenging and a lot of fun. Now I'm trying to keep the aircraft in a stable hover. I try not to over control, and again I'm trying to lead with the throttle, reducing RPMs, and thereby making the helicopter descend a little smoother. However, I'm still practicing on that perfect landing to make it really smooth and the touchdown really gentle. So that concludes our flight. We are at Ascension Island helipad. I'm going to quickly show you the bug with the replay. The touchdown wasn't all that bad, but then I somehow slid forward a little bit. Now lowering collective and rolling off the throttle. So before we shut down the aircraft, my quick summary about the Flyinside Bell 47. It is a great simulation of a vintage, sturdy, piston-powered helicopter. There's great attention to detail, and it's a lot of fun to fly, and it was also a little bit of a challenge for me. That's what I love about it. However, there are a few minor bugs. Some of them already have been fixed, but some are still there. It's the altimeter setting that is off. The panning of the sound could be a little bit better for stereo systems. For eye candy, the main rotor blades do not look that good. They're a little stiff and too linear in shape for my taste. Also, the animation of the rotor stopping when you shut down the aircraft is a little abrupt. I would really appreciate if the aircraft would save the configuration that I left it in, so that not all switches are in the on position. Now we're going to take a look at that replay issue that is still there. If I replay my landing here, we just see the helicopter moving sideways, and you all remember that this didn't happen, right? Another thing for VATSIM, it would be festive if I put the transponder on the altitude reporting mode, so mode Charlie. It would actually do the same within my VATSIM client. But that's pretty much it. I mean, these are minor things that are hopefully being fixed in the next update. Other than that, yeah, I really love this machine. I think it may easily become one of my favorites. Well, yeah, another thing that you notice right there is the change in the reflection of the bubble. Did you see that? Don't know where that is coming from. Maybe a change in lighting with the next plane. Well, yeah, minor things. I'm going to roll off the throttle. I'm going to roll it off slowly so the rotor doesn't start to freewheel. And yeah, again, attention to detail. Just watch the animation of the vibrations here. I'm loving that. There we go, we're shaking. We're going to let the engine cool off in ground idle. Also, a thing that seems to be modeled is sort of mast bumping effect. So you should be careful not to do too excessive control inputs while you're in cruise flight. Or X-Plane will tell you that you crashed the aircraft, that you pulled too much G. So I will now switch off radio, transponder, all the lights that I don't need, so all lights except the anti-collision beacon. I will switch off the alternator, the instrument power. I may leave that up, I don't know. And then we kill the engine by pulling out the mixture lever, or pushing it down. And we're going to set the magnetos to off. And then we basically have to wait until the rotors stop, because there's no rotor brake on this thing. I'm not going to bore you with that, but I'm going to show you the animation of the rotor stopping, which is one of my critique points as far as eye candy goes. And that concludes our little aircraft review. Basically, it was a pretty long one. I hope it was a thorough one, and I hope you liked it. And if you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I hope to see you around next time.